it is time to finally talk about season 7 of Degrassi. So, a lot has happened this season as the school Lakehurst burns down and all of the students come to Degrassi. So, there is a slew of new characters, which I will get into in a completely separate video. Now, I will say that Lakehurst gives some pretty good contrast to Degrassi, as Degrassi is seen as this perfect bright spot school. Meanwhile, Lakehurst has a lot of bad apples in the bunch. Also, Lakehurst seems like it's like more grittier. I think that's the word I'm looking for. And just a whole different vibe from Degrassi, which is why seeing the two schools come together is really interesting. In this season, we also have a really good balance of those who have graduated from the school and those who are still there. It feels like we got equal screen time with both of those groups as opposed to season 6, where it seemed like they focused more on Degrassi than the kids that graduated. And lastly, Craig makes another appearance during spring break just to perform, and he's looking like he's doing a lot better than the last time we saw him. And also, Sean makes an appearance before he ships out to unfortunately go to war, and it's the last time we see him. And now let's talk about all of the new kids that come to Degrassi in season 7. First up is Jane, who is this like alternative, not girly girl, and has a relationship with Spinner. Next up, we have the trio Holly J, Anya, and Sav. Holly J is Heather Sinclair's sister, Heather Sinclair, who we never see but always hear about in Degrassi. And her, I guess you could call them best friends, is Anya. I say that because Holly J treats her horribly. And when Anya asks her about it, she says she does it because Anya lets her. So it's not a wonderful relationship, but Anya is pretty much the only person that will be friends with Holly J. And Sav and Anya have a crush on each other and they start going out in this season. But that's after Holly J says that she has a crush on him, and there's this whole thing. Next up is Johnny and who I like to call his crew of terror, because it involves this kid named Bruce and also the guy who stabbed JT earlier in the series was in that crew. They kind of walk around the school creating as much chaos as they can. And another member of that group is Lucas, who is Jane's older brother, but she has changed her last name, so no one knows that that's her brother. He also is the one who fathers Mia's daughter. And those are the main new characters that we see have a lot of screen time this season. And now let's talk about Emma in season 7 of Degrassi. This season, Emma thinks it's time for her to get back on her activism, and so she becomes a school rep for Purple Dragon as to sort of like infiltrate them from the inside. And thus we get the famous scene of her taking that purple dress off in front of the entire school. And I will say that that was a very true to Emma moment. Sometimes she's just a little bit extra. She also starts seeing Damien this season, which, I mean, I think everyone was expecting that to happen as soon as he showed up. And she also gets accepted into her dream school along with Manny. We also see her deal with the aftermath of Mr. Simpson's suspension, and her mom takes her little brother and leaves, and Emma decides to stay and help and be a support to him in this time. And that really shows a huge progression in their relationship when you compare it to how Emma felt and treated him when he first married her mom. And we love to see it. We start off this season with Manny still dealing with the fact that her dad is completely controlling her life, and he even starts using finances as a way to control her, which is just not okay. It doesn't really matter if you're a parent or not. That's uncool. And so she decides to use Jay as a way to act out and freak out her parents. So they start this whole fake relationship. And at her debut, she basically puts on a whole show for her father to get him to realize that she is a serious actor. And he does realize that. And he finally lets her start making her own decisions and go and choose the career path of acting. Now, Manny and Jay's relationship starts getting a little confusing because they start fake dating and then they get fake engaged, but then they both start catching feelings for each other. He ruins her audition for college, but then he saves her audition for college. And then they get real engaged. But then they break up because she pawns the engagement ring to buy plane tickets for him to go visit his parents. But then she finds out that that whole spiel was a lie. And then he goes and breaks into the pawn shop to get the ring back, and that upsets her. So they break up. And then I think they get back together, but I'm not 100% sure. It's all very confusing. And then, like I said in a previous video, Manny gets accepted into college, but she also gets a role on a TV show, and now she's forced to choose. And at first, she decides to skip college and go directly to the TV show because that would mean that she's a working actor. But then she finds out that the school that she got into turned away the guy who was supposed to be her co-star like 3 times, and she realizes that that's where she needs to be, and so she decides to go to college. And now let's talk about Spinner in season 7 of Degrassi. This season, Spinner gets diagnosed with testicular cancer and he does not take it well at all. First, he starts picking fights with whoever he can, and that includes Johnny and pretty much everyone in his crew of terror. Then he starts using Mary J to help with his chemo side effects, but Spinner high during school is just not a good combination. And the principal basically encourages him to take some time off until he has the strength to come back to school. And he does, and he goes into remission, but he realizes that he missed so much school that his grades are just very poor. And he's really going to have to get his butt into gear and study hard and pass his finals if he wants to graduate. And at this point, he's super discouraged, and so he decides to just fail out of school and play in his band for the rest of his life. But then he realizes that that's not going to work out, and he actually really does need to pass and graduate. And it's almost too late for him, but with the help of Jimmy pulling the fire alarm, he gets a second chance to study more for his final. And at the end of the season, he is able to graduate. Now let's talk about Jimmy in season 7 of Degrassi. In the beginning of the season, Jimmy and Ashley are still together, and Ashley wants to get back into music, and Jimmy just kind of tags along and helps her out, raps on one of her tracks. And then Jimmy starts to get more recognition than her, and this causes a rift in their relationship. Ashley does cut him off the track that he was on, and they do eventually break up, and she continues with her music, and then we see him stay back at school. We do see Jimmy in physio more, and he starts hanging out and eventually starts going out with a girl there named Trina. Jimmy does get accepted into a pre-law program, and things are looking pretty great for him. One of Jimmy's friends at physio gets stem cell surgery and is able to start walking again, and so Jimmy wants that for himself, and he asks his parents, and his dad just flat out tells him no. Then Jimmy catches his father having an affair, and so he basically blackmails him into letting him have the stem cell surgery. And at the end of the season for graduation, Jimmy is actually able to walk across the stage and get his diploma. And now let's talk about Mia in season 7 of Degrassi. This season, Mia struggles juggling motherhood, her extracurriculars, and taking care of her daughter, Isabella. Lucas expressed interest in wanting to help with Isabella. First, he starts off giving Mia money, and then he says that he wants to actually spend time with her. Mia does allow this, and she also gets back together with Lucas. But I didn't really like how the show kind of made it seem like Mia and Lucas had to be in a relationship in order for him to be involved in Isabella's life. And it doesn't take much time for Lucas to be more interested in partying than having a family. And that leads to Mia bringing Isabella to one of Lucas's parties, and Children's Aid ends up getting called on her because the cops show up. And Lucas does express that he really doesn't want to be responsible or be a father anymore, and is in that moment that Mia realizes that she just needs to cut ties with him and continue with the help of her mom in order for her to keep her daughter. And that's where we leave Mia at the end of the season. Now let's talk about Darcy in season 7 of Degrassi. Darcy goes through a lot this season. We start off with her still dating Peter and lying to her parents about it because they do not like him at all. Then she goes to a ski lodge with Manny and Peter and has a drink, and she thinks she had sex with Peter, but isn't completely sure because she blacked out. Sometime later, she finds out that there was a guy who was roofing people at the lodge, and she realizes that she is one of his victims. And this pretty much sends her into a downward spiral. She only tells Manny about what actually happened to her, so she's just dealing with everything on her own. She does go see a counselor, but she does not share that information with her. Now, Darcy is suicidal and she does attempt suicide at one point, but luckily Manny finds her just in time. Then she starts talking to Mr. Simpson and she does tell him what happened to her. But after that, she starts getting kind of too close with him as she's a student and he's a teacher. And when Mr. Simpson tries to get her help, she accuses him of being inappropriate with her, thus getting him suspended. Now, she does eventually tell the truth, but it does not immediately change things. So now her parents are kind of stuck because they have no idea how to help her, and she hasn't really told them the truth about what happened to her at the lodge yet. And so over spring break, they send her to a camp for troubled teens, and it is there when we finally see her come out of that dark place. And by the end of the season, she has finally told her parents and is doing a whole lot better. Now I want to talk a bit about Mr. Simpson in season 7 of Degrassi. But like I said in a previous video, Mr. Simpson was accused of inappropriate behavior and so he gets suspended. Now, I also said that he gets cleared of everything that he did, but going back to the school afterwards was just a nightmare. He deals with some bullying from the students and decides to just leave. And he gets pretty depressed, and that leads to Emma's mom moving out with their son because he's just sitting on the couch eating and wallowing. And I thought the whole situation was just pretty unfortunate. Mr. Simpson is like the best teacher at the school, so for him to get accused of something like that sucks, but also for him to be treated like he's just this gross guy, even after he was cleared of everything, it was a sucky situation. And things like this happen in high schools all the time. And unfortunately, a lot of the time it does turn out to be true. So I'm thankful that that was not the case in this situation. And Mr. Simpson does end up getting counseling and he is able to return to the school and he's in a much better place. And now let's talk about Paige in season 7 of Degrassi. So in this season, Paige is back on her on again, off again thing with Alex, and she also starts a new job with, I believe, a fashion designer. Paige starts to rely on Alex to help her out with her job because Alex is done with school and she's not really doing much of anything, and she's also moved out of her mother's home and is living with Paige. Things don't go well with that arrangement because obviously Paige cares a lot about this job and Alex could not give two craps about it. So in the end, they break up and Alex moves on with her life. She moves in with, I believe, her aunt, and that was the last time we saw her this season. Now, Paige is living with Marco and Ellie, and they also have a roommate named Griffin, and he and her hook up. And shortly after that night, Paige finds out that he has HIV. Now, of course, Paige is upset about it, and rightfully so. She has the right to feel her feelings. I will say this. I don't have an issue with Degrassi bringing in a character who has HIV. But what I do have issue with is how they went about it. I know it can be very difficult for a person to tell their partner their diagnosis. And so I wish that instead of Paige finding out after she was snooping through his things, that they were able to just sit down and have that conversation. Now, at the end of the season, Paige's dad co-signs a lease for her for a condo, and she is moving out of Marco and Ellie's place. Now it's time to talk about Ellie in season 7 of Degrassi. Now, Ellie has some ups and downs this season. It starts off with her, for some reason, still in a relationship with Jesse. And then there's the Caitlin Ryan debacle when Ellie catches Caitlin and Jesse making out, and instead of handling it calmly, she gets kind of drunk and she's supposed to give this big interview with Caitlin, and she basically craps all over it. And it was really embarrassing, but also super concerning when you consider the fact that Ellie's mom also had issues with drinking. Luckily, things start going in a much better direction for her, and at the end of the season, she is named editor of The Core, the paper that she has been writing for. And that's where we leave Ellie this season. And now let's talk about Marco in season 7 of Degrassi. Similar to Ellie, Marco is also not in a good place at the beginning of this season as he is having a tough time with his breakup with Dylan. Marco's also in need of some money, and that leads him to gambling, which does not go well. He also makes this new friend who loves to go out and do very expensive things, and that's why he's so pressured into having money. Now, Marco does tell his friend that he is strapped for cash, and his friend then takes him to one of his clients and suggests that Marco should, just casually prostitute himself. But thankfully, Marco does not take part in that activity. And he cuts off that friend. After all of that horribleness, Marco does start seeing Eric, who works at the core with Ellie, and things do start heading in a better direction for him. Now, at the end of the season, people start making comments about how Marco and Ellie's relationship has been super codependent pretty much since the time they were in high school. And then one night they did things like making out type things. And it almost went further than that. And that was the moment that it took for both of them to finally realize that they were just too codependent with each other. And so at the end of the season, they're also moving out of the apartment and going their separate ways. Now let's talk about the season 7 finale of Degrassi, that prom and graduation. Starting off with all of the wild events that happened surrounding prom. On a good note, Natasha Bedingfield was a special guest on the show as she sang at their prom, thanks to Liberty for winning a radio contest. And that was pretty awesome, but now on to the drama. Now, like I said in a previous video, Emma is dating Damien at the time, and it turns out that Liberty and Damien are both valedictorians, and so they have to campaign so the school can decide who gives the speech at graduation. Throughout the situation, they do get pretty close, and they also realize that they're both going to the same college next year. Now, Liberty is just straight up with him and says, there's something between us. And I think they're both considering the fact that Emma and Damien are not going to the same college in the next year, and he and Liberty are. So they start sneaking around, and they think that they can hold off until after graduation and Damien breaks up with Emma, but they get caught. And then they get put on blast in front of pretty much everyone. And that leads to Liberty being shunned by Emma, Manny, and Toby. But it doesn't last long, especially with graduation and them remembering JT and the fact that they've been friends for so long. And speaking of graduation, that moment that the four of them had, basically giving JT his own cap and then moving his tassel so he's graduated, has got to be one of the most heart-wrenching but also rude moments I've seen in television, and don't understand how you could sit and watch that and not sob uncontrollably. And so we end season 7 with a crying fest. Don't forget to let me know what you thought of everything that happened this season. If you missed any videos, don't hesitate to go to my page and watch them. And stay tuned because, of course, season 8 is next.